Hello, what's up? This is Silas. I'm back here with Steven. You can say what's up to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
We're here for continuing our conversation series. This time we're on cracks in the Ivory Tower, the moral mess of higher education. And this is part of a several part series on this topic that me and Steven have been going through different series on different topics. The first one was You Are What You Consume, and I think that's kind of a central thing I'm thinking of in this channel, and I've enjoyed having these conversations with Steven. It started with that one about what you consume just in food-wise that builds up your body, the proteins, the carbs, and the fats and things like that make up your physical self. But we're also trying to expand on the mental things that take in and also the ideas that come behind the foods and things like that. Now, this has expanded to talking about different topics and going into the actual nitty-gritty, because those are things we intake, and that makes us who we are as a person, our societies, our cultures, our views, our values, and our ethics and morals and things like that. So with this one, I think we're talking specifically about a topic that is near and dear, I think, to us and everyone. I think even most of the topics we've talked about have been like that, and this is education. So tell us a bit about the book and why we're talking about this topic.
Sure. So this book, The Cracks in the Ivory Tower, The Moral Mess of Higher Education, it's, as you can probably tell by the title, it's about various ethical concerns in the university system. Now, of course, people like us will often complain about the ideologies that are taught in school, but this book isn't focused on that. This book is focused more on issues as far as how the funding is structured, how teachers are incentivized to spend more time researching rather than teaching, how grading isn't really accurate, how performance evaluations aren't really accurate, how students have to take a lot of classes that they don't want, but they just have to for arbitrary credit requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this book does a very good job because it breaks these issues down point by point. And when you look at it that way, you realize all these things have a cumulative effect, and this is why the university system is the mess it is. So it's one of those things that ultimately it is sort of complicated, but once you break it down point by point, it's easy to understand.
Yeah. And with this one, I think it's also key to be speaking about this at this current moment in time as we're going through a big change as a global society, as we get to this globalized world where people are looking at certain countries and certain locations and seeing, how does that work? We understand the power of knowledge, the power of information. It's the information age. I think we're going to transitioning into what I'd like to call the age of understanding. And we're understanding how important it is to actually have accurate information about things, and the means to actually transfer information from one generation to the next, from person to person, is such a key and powerful thing. So with this series, I think right now going through this pandemic, we're going through times where people are looking, a lot of systems that were set up have been put on pause, and then things are being restarted. There's other things that were competing with this one, and people are like, oh, well, let's try this other thing. And there wasn't any actual space to enter the field because they had these people who had captured these. This is something that we do. We get used to something and we think, okay, that's the best way to do it. Then everybody kind of copies that. Then they have less trust for these other things. So there's a lot of things that people have been there's a lot of things that people have tried that I think would have taken a lot longer for them to try and actually initiate. So I think a lot of changes are coming, and this series I think is important because it goes over some of the things that we can kind of look at, and now that we have this time to pause and say, let's not restart these things, or if we start adopting new things, let's see if we can avoid these things, or if we do restart these things, how are some of the things in these systems that we can remove as we restart and go forward, because there's major issues. So I'm going to read you the chapter list because we're breaking down this conversation into different chapters. We've recorded 2 parts. On a third part, we recorded 2 chapters. We're on to chapter 3 here. We've recorded a separate part, which is about the 7 big economic insights, normative business ethic questions, and descriptive business ethics questions. And we shall be referring to those things, or in general, those are the things that the authors and us, me and Steven, both think, or is it Steven and I, or me and Steven? Steven and I, right?
Steven and I think, because if you think about it, you would say I think, not me think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we also think that these are things you should keep in mind as you read the actual book. If you read the book or if you listen to us discussing it, this is kind of what the authors had in mind when they were actually tackling this information. And you can also use them for other things. So if you haven't seen any of the other ones, I at least suggest you watch that one video before watching this. I think it would help. Now, here are the chapters. Number 1 was Neither Gremlins Nor Poltergeists. Number 2 was What the Academics Really Want. Number 3, Why Most Academic Advertising is Immoral Bullshit. That's the one we're going to be on today. Mm-hmm. Number 4, On Reading Entrails and Student Evaluations. Number 5, Grades, Communication Breakdown. Number 6, When Moral Language is a Cover for Self-Interest. Number 7, The General Education Hustle. Number 8, Why Universities Produce Too Many PhDs. Number 9, cheaters everywhere. Number 10, 3 big myths about what's plaguing higher education. And number 11, answering the taxpayers. Then after we get to number 11, we will do one extra, just kind of winding things down and concluding some of the thoughts and just having some discussions, and also a call to engagement to anyone who has been coming along with us in this series, and also might do a small little intro to the next one, which is going to be Human Action. That's what I'm super excited about, that series. But yeah, so into it now. Stephen, unless you have anything to say about these, with number 3, why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit.
No, yeah. I'm all set. Let's jump right in.
Okay.
Sure. All right. So our authors start off here by talking a little bit about Harvard. They talk about how Harvard has these continuing education programs, which they have open enrollment, like a community college. They charge about $1,500. I think it's, $1,550 per class. And it's sort of this funny thing where they tell people, oh, yeah, you can come here and learn here at Harvard. But of course, it doesn't earn you an official Harvard diploma. It's continuing education classes. So older people will sometimes go and do that. And then they'll brag, oh, I learned at Harvard. But but in reality, they took continuing education classes taught by adjuncts, not the actual curriculum. It's sort of
$1,550 for the continuing education classes
per class. Yeah.
Oh, wow. All the classes. It doesn't matter what it is. That's
no, just per class. So it almost reminds me of, like, in certain restaurants where people will brag, oh, I worked at the higher end restaurant, but then you find out that they worked in, like, the sister restaurant that's not as, like, it's owned by the same people, but it's not as nice or something. Like, there's Boulé, and then there was Boulé upstairs, which is more casual, but someone said, oh, I worked at Boulé, but they didn't actually work in the main dining hall. So people try to do a similar thing here where they say, oh yeah, I got this top education, but they really technically didn't. Okay. So the other thing that Harvard does is that it's kind of messed up, is that they entice all these people to apply with the intention of turning them down. The idea is that they want to have a very, very low admissions rate. I think their admission rate here, it says 5.4%. So what they do is they tell all these people, oh yeah, apply here, you can go to Harvard too. But of course, they have no intention of accepting those people. So then they just turn them all down. And then in the U.S. News and World Report, they have a high ranking because they can say, look, we accept very, very few applicants. But again, it's messed up because they tell people that they have no intention of accepting, hey, you should apply here, you can go too, and then they turn them down. So they're wasting their time, they're wasting their energy, all that, just so they can have that ranking. And
about then, about what percent per year do you think are actual legacy students, where they know, like, they're pretty sure where maybe 100 kids a year, they know, okay, these 100 are going to get, if these 100 apply, they'll get in regardless. Is there kind of a situation like that?
It's hard to say. I haven't seen anything on that so far. I know people have said that Harvard's very corrupt, though. Like, if your family is going there or you donate a bunch of money, they'll take you. Yeah. And then, of course, add in other things like affirmative action, things like that. Like Wilfred Riley said, he actually was offered education at Yale when he applied.
Because that's the thing. I'm thinking there has to be a percent that's set aside, maybe 10, 15% that they know realistically. Just if it's just business. I'm not even saying it's through shady means. Just the way a business runs and the way a system runs and the way an institution runs, where they're sure. Let's say they're accepting. What's the average number of students per year? I don't see you here. I'm seeing. Before aid, the average annual cost is $73,800. Wow. And then after aid, it's somehow $15,561. So that aid is I guess that includes grants and scholarships from the institution, state and federal government. So it's not just public money. It's one positive thing. But I'm not seeing the actual number of students.
No.
Let's just say it's 2,000 students a semester. Let's say it's an 8,000 student school. It might be less than that, but let's say 2,000 each year. 2,000 freshmen come in. I would think they would just know from the way applications have gone. There's 250 people who, if the application hits the table, those students are coming in. Whether it's, as you said, for legacy purposes, for donation purposes, or affirmative action, like we have to have at least, so the top Black people that qualify, we're going to bring them in regardless. So they know that. So there's even a lesser number. If you take that number that's guaranteed to enter, then that 5% acceptance rate even drops, because I wouldn't count those ones guaranteed people in there. So the acceptance rate could actually be something like 2-3%. If you actually figure it in.
It's true.
Right,
so then it's okay. So then our authors say this chapter may be the most damning in the book. So
okay.
So now we talk about so now they spout off some lines about the various colleges put out. You've seen all these about this is a transformative experience. You'll come here, you'll become a leader of tomorrow. You'll be the brave new leader in this world. This is a life-changing experience, all those usual things. So they say that the average college spends about $472,000 a year on marketing advertisements. The highest number they found was actually $3.5 million on advertising. So
who was that?
They didn't mention the college. They just said it was the highest number they found.
Million.
Yeah, 3.5 million. So I'm wondering how that works too. They didn't get into this as much, but like I said before, colleges like Harvard, they're not going to spend as much on advertising because again, people will go to them. It's the same thing like Ferrari and the top restaurants and all that. They're not going to put out ads because people know who they are. People are going to go there. So there's less incentive to reach out to people. Whereas if you're a lesser known school, you have to make the appeal to get people to go there.
Okay.
And this is sort of like the point I made about the administrators last time about we can debate how much should a college spend, but bear in mind that the amount they do spend, that will take away from other things. So again, you spend $3.5 million on advertising. Well, how much tuition could you afford using that money? How many new professors could you afford? How many new administrators, depending what you want? So it's at least bearing in mind that this does take away from other things as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, would they count people flying around in private jets to go to certain fairs at exclusive locations to be some cost? So maybe even if you have something like Harvard where they're not necessarily doing it that much, or these Ivy League schools, I keep using Harvard, but that goes to what you're saying. When people talk about top schools, Harvard doesn't need to constantly advertise because you'll have jamokes like us constantly name dropping that when there's 8 other Ivy League schools. But so maybe you can have some of those schools where they might not do it as frequently as another school, but the few times they do it, it's so expensive. Like, oh, we're taking out our top provosts or people, and then they need to go on a private jet to the Middle East for some conference in there. And then that whole trip itself cost maybe $50,000 just for that one trip. Then that could maybe account for something being that high, because you're doing few of those, but it's each of those advertising trips is a lot higher than a local university going to like taking the public transport bus to the local high school. I don't know.
But again, that would probably be classified as like traveling and expenses or something. Versus this, they're actually putting out advertisements and things like that. Like I was starting to say, like with restaurants, like Danielle or the French Laundry that we did the video on, they're not going to put out ads because those are world-class restaurants. People come from all over to go there. So it's a waste of their money to put out ads trying to bring more people there. And again, it's the same thing with the cars. Like Ferrari's not going to advertise because they're a world famous brand that expensive, that people with money will buy their expensive cars. So it's not worth it to them to put out their names. Like they may have an ad here and there, but it's like they're not going to make a serious effort. And then back to restaurants, it's the same thing. Like you can have a great young up and coming chef who's unknown who will advertise a lot because they want to get noticed. But if they already have the big name, what's the point?
Okay, so now I'm trying because this is really. I think what I'm saying, like you said, it definitely depends on how you define the advertising. Now, another kind of way I'm thinking is what are the biggest advertising type of times? I'm thinking maybe in sporting events and things like that. So maybe there's a kind of thing where they might say like a certain university involved maybe during the college football playoffs or the Super Bowl. Is there a way to put like an advert where the entire conference is advertising somehow, and then once you put that advertising, because what could, if it's just classical advertising as in newspapers online spaces, paying ads on Facebook and Twitter and social media platforms, Google ads and things like that. And then I guess television spots. I don't see how one university can spend 3.5 in one calendar year, unless they're fudging the books. It just seems odd.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right.
So anyway, this next section, they talk about the liberal arts. And of course, you hear similar lines about liberal arts about, oh, this is a transformative experience, that liberal arts education will train you how to be a leader of tomorrow, all this. And most colleges actually admit that liberal arts don't train anyone for an actual job. The word transform gets used a lot in a lot of these advertisements. And colleges often say they will help students improve these skills. Others say they will instill these skills. Any comments on that?
I think I figured it out. It could be the arts institutes, those kind of places, because they do a lot of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of advertising with those schools, and they charge a lot of money for what you're actually getting, for the kind of teacher that go there. I've been to an art institute. That's part of my background. It was like the Institute of European Design. It was a good school, but the teachers were great. They're still in contact with some of the teachers. There were artists in their own right, working in the field, working in the market. So I don't think they were being paid as much as we discussed in the previous discussion that we had. This one talking about, what was it, 100 for the full-time professors was something like $150,000 on average in the United States of America, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Harvard was like 220,000.
Yeah. So I doubt that my professors in Turin were being paid anywhere close to that kind of money for the teaching that they were doing. So you have those arts institutes where they might be high initial costs to start the company, get the computers, get the programs, but the running costs of them are not that high, and the turnaround. You have these 1-year programs, 2-year programs, people coming in, a lot of students, a lot of professionals who want to get there to do some extra work. And I see a lot of advertising, and this is just some rumors. There's been some coverage about some of these things, how they could be some money laundering involvement with some of those arts institutes type of institutions. So that could be where this 3.5 million is there. If anybody else is watching this and listening to this and has heard who would be spending this high, give us your ideas on where you think that spending could be. Okay.
Well, where I went to culinary school, it gets more complicated because you think about it, they have to pay for all those ingredients, which will expire, and they have to use in a certain amount of time. But the other side of that is that they have restaurants that are open to the public that students have to work in as part of the program. So students are paying to work in those restaurants, and they're making money from those. Now, of course, officially they say the school is nonprofit, but I don't buy that for a second. Apparently now they have a brewery and other things. So, and also at CIA, it's a bit different. I think the structure is different now, but they used to have a block structure where it's like new students start every 3 weeks and then go to a new class. So it's, you take this class for 3 weeks, you go to your next class, you take that class 3 weeks, next class, and on and on. So as students are essentially being rotated in and out. So there aren't a lot of students on campus at one time, but as far as the number of people that go through there, it's pretty high because you figure new people start and graduate every 3 weeks. So it's not like a typical school where it's all these people start 6 months, another 6 months, and then after 4 years graduate. No, it's every 3 weeks. So, and then factor in that there are dropouts and other things. So
yeah, and you don't get your money back after you've paid.
No.
Even especially a lot of the people who join these universities will be with the financial aid. That's what I'm saying. There's money laundering is not. It's not just a nefarious kind of nature where it's like, oh, we're going to get these people from the mafia coming in and laundering their money through it. They could be money laundering schemes, or I don't know if this counts as money laundering necessarily. I guess if you count taxation as extortion, then that's kind of a crime. but
there's tax shelters and stuff. Like, for example, I've heard that like that's why hedge funds will invest in restaurants and other things, because they find ways to sort of like put some of their money in there. Then if it gets converted to cash and then cash transactions, then that doesn't get taxed. And there's some complicated thing with that. I don't fully understand it, but those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about might be more tax fraud, if anything. Maybe, because they will accept students in that they know from their own figures are riskier, that are not actually going to graduate or not going to spend the entire time there. Yeah. So they'll let those people in, but then the financial aid will be released to the school, whether that kid comes to one class or not. The school still gets to pocket that money. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So the next section, they talk about why to study philosophy. They make the same claim as the liberal arts. Basically, you'll be a better writer, better communicator, you'll think better, be better at making connections, think more critically, etc. So the daily, I think it's new, NOUS. I think it's a French word for we. I'm not 100% sure. They offer a page showing a chart that contained these 4 points. Philosophy majors have the 4th highest overall GMAT scores of any major after physics, mathematics, and engineering. Philosophy majors have the highest LSAT scores of any major. Philosophy majors have the highest GRE verbal and analytic writing scores of any major, plus better GRE quantitative reasoning scores. I almost said easing scores than all other humanities and social science majors except economics. They have the highest overall GRE scores. Philosophy majors have the highest mid-career salaries of all non-STEM majors, with an average mid-career salary of just under $85,000. Now, I can send you these if you don't remember all of them, but let me point out here that all these claims are actually true statistically, and they go on to cite other ththings. For example, philosophy majors are admitted to law school at a higher rate than other majors, and they're actually the 3rd highest accepted. They have the 3rd highest rate of acceptance into medical school. So this but then this in this next section we're going to talk about what's called selection versus treatment effects. So they start off by saying Jason's aunt offers him a tea for a cold and says it'll cure him of the cold in 7 to 10 days. Well, you see the problem with that. Most colds go away in 7 to 10 days. So the cold is going to go away whether he drinks it or not. So this is a case of correlation doesn't prove causation, or the Latin post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's because of this, therefore this. Well, like the example I first heard was, oh, the rooster crows in the morning and the sun comes up. The rooster causes the sun to come up. Okay, we know that's not the case. We know that's not the case. The sun is going to come up regardless. And it's the same thing here. It's Jason's cold is going to go away anyway, because that's just your immune system fights against it. In 7 to 10 days, it's gone. So it's a similar thing here. There's good evidence that students don't improve much in their writing, mathematical, or critical reasoning over 4 years. This will be explained more in depth later. And then there's these other 2 points here. People with bachelor's degrees are generally smarter and more successful than people without bachelor's degrees. Philosophy majors tend to be smarter and more successful than other majors. So again, but then this is going to get into the treatment versus selection effects. So Malcolm Gladwell here explains, social scientists distinguish between what are known as treatment effects and selection effects. The Marine Corps, for instance, is largely a treatment effect institution. It doesn't have an enormous admissions office grading applicants along 4 separate dimensions of toughness and intelligence. It's confident that the experience of undergoing Marine Corps basic training will turn you into a formidable soldier. A modeling agency, by contrast, is a selection effect institution. You don't become beautiful by signing up with an agency. You get signed up with an agency because you are beautiful. So then they go on to say here, they compare Harvard to Keene State College in New Hampshire. They seem to pick on this school a lot. I don't know why. So Harvard turns down 95% of its applicants. Keene accepts people who on average had a less than B average in high school and low SAT scores. So that gets into, again, selection versus treatment. You're already taking people who have higher SAT scores. Again, we can get into the other things like donations and affirmative action, all that, but on average, they typically take the cream of the crop as far as students, whereas Keene has a much lower bar, but then as they'll get into later, Keene will also take in higher achieving students. But that can be misleading, because there could be a student who was a decent above average student in high school but wants to stay local or something, that goes to Keene, versus someone who barely got by that gets accepted into Keene. So that becomes a little misleading. And Jason actually considered medical school when he was a freshman in college, and he read an article about how classics majors had the highest success rates when applying to med school. But again, this gets into treatment versus selection. Is it that learning Latin and Greek and reading all those old texts, it makes you a better doctor? Well, no, probably not. I mean, it may help you with certain terminology as far as body parts and all that, but it's more, if you're willing to study hard, learn all those things, you have the brain power to do it, yeah, you're going to do better in medical school because you're a smarter, more conscientious student.
Okay.
So, any thoughts or commentary on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask a bit more about thinking it was like that, where it is going to be a certain kind of person that chooses to enter philosophy course, like to major in philosophy to begin with, that also has the things that would select for law for these other fields that for med school and things like that. I think philosophy is more about thinking about the human condition, like how people think and work and things like that. Then medical is about how the physical body, like we were talking about at the start, you are what you consume. So it makes sense that somebody who's predisposed to understanding the human experience in that sense would choose those philosophy and also be drawn towards med school. And then there would also, of course, there's no, as we mentioned before, there's no like professional philosophers.
Yeah.
So you have to find something to do with your general aptitude. That makes complete sense. What was the thing again? Could you repeat those two terms? Because I think that was important. The terms you use to
selection
describe
selection versus treatment effects.
Selection versus treatment effects. Okay.
Because what I was going to add on a little bit too is that if you take something like a professional sports league, obviously you could make the case that like a person like LeBron James he's going to be pushed to his apex. Like he's going to have to do intense practices. He's going to have to push himself hard, but there's still the selection effect. Like I'm 5'9" and stocky. You take somebody like me, put me into the NBA. I'm not going to become LeBron James. That's just how it is. But you could make the case that, and they'll talk about this more in a bit, but like philosophy majors, you're taking kids who are already smart, critical thinkers, all that, and you're pushing them to a higher level, but they're still sort of pre-selecting for those things. And it's the same thing with the Marines, with the treatment effect. You can't take obviously like a quadriplegic and turn them into a Marine, but you can take a person of average stature, teach them how to shoot, get them in good shape, teach them discipline, push the endurance, all that. So they're going to reach that higher level. They may not be on par with like some of the special forces guys, but they're still going to be higher than what they started as. Yeah.
It's like saying most Marine graduates are between 25 and 30. It's like, yeah, because they enter at a younger age. They're not out there recruiting 45-year-olds to join the Marines. Like it's not a thing that happens. But it seems to be that's one of the problems that happens. And I think why this is a key part, because in advertising, the schools, some of the advertising, they don't outright say it, but they leave that in there. It's implied that just by being there will make you a better person in a certain way versus being at a certain place may polish certain things certain abilities and things that you have. And I don't understand that disconnect. I used to have it a lot more, so I'm trying to understand what made me get over that disconnect where I realized like I have certain physical limitations or physical gifts. Like before I got to, I think when I got to middle school, it was like in 8th grade. I had never lifted weights before. I went to like the weight room for the first time, and I was already squatting. Once I learned what a squat was, I was squatting like 350 pounds, like in the first week. So by a year after that, I was breaking. I think 2 years later, I was doing 500. So that's stuff that people who've been lifting for years, doing like gear and I don't know, complete like anabolic steroids or things like that, but just gear, doing their diets down, doing a proper breakdown, the lifting and things like that. They just couldn't do that just because of my physical actual abilities. I just have certain physical things that I'll be able to do. And we understand that. And it's not even just the whole family, because like with my older brother, just had his birthday the other day and we're just talking and things like that. And he's like, oh, nice beard. I'm like, yeah, I haven't shaved in like, I think it's like 2 years. But for him, he's older than I am, but he can't grow a beard. It just doesn't come in. And no one's going to look at him and expect, oh, just grow the beard just because your brother can, just because this other person can. But when it comes to the mental stuff, people seem to think that you just put no one would believe that if you just put my brother and you had him have the diet and live in the locations that I did, all of a sudden he would grow a beard. There's certain limitations in the genetics. But somehow they think if you just took me and had me study all the things my brother studied, I would think exactly like him or be able to hold the job that he does, do the things that he does. That's I don't get how people don't get that. They don't understand that the brain itself, the mind is part of the brain, and the brain is a physical part. If you chop half your brain out, you're not going to be able to do the same things as you do if you have the full brain. So people with different brain sizes, people with different effects. Somebody was a kid and then they saw their parents get murdered or something versus somebody who wasn't. Like these things affect the way people work and the way people actually approach things. And also good with your LeBron James example, the NBA doesn't make you tall and athletic.
No.
Being tall and athletic helps you in the NBA. That's it's that kind of thing.
again, there is treatment to a point as far as okay, like they say Michael Jordan when he played, he had some of the most intense practices out of anyone. So he pushed himself to his limit. But at the same time, he was already, I think he's like 6'6". He's already obviously very coordinated, very a lot of fast twitch muscles in his legs, most likely, all that. So it's like you're already selecting those things, and then you're pushing them as hard as they can.
Yeah.
And then it's a similar thing with models. Like you're taking women who are tall, good looking, they still have to eat diets, they still have to maintain their skin, all that. Like there is treatment, like to a slight bit, but again, you're already selecting for those categories. You know, you're not going to take someone who's short, unattractive, and turn them into Heidi Klum or whoever you want. Yeah.
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 And then you also look at like some certain additional things, environmental as well, that play into this. Why is it that certain positions and certain athletes, when you look at something like the American football, you look at a lot of them come from the South, come from Southern areas. It's not just like, oh, all black people in general come from all these areas to play these positions. It's like, no, specifically people with Negro genes from certain locations in the South that are mostly hot and mostly like times where they're just running around outside for a lot more time. They can play since Pee-wee. Whereas you have people from the North, even if you look at the black people from the North, they're normally like the bigger kind of people, the linemen and things like that will come from those positions and things like that, where they have more time indoors. Maybe they're having different diets, they have different approaches to things, they're not playing the sports as much. And a few other selection things, also certain cultures, certain ways you raise, the nurture of it, certain communities, people are going to be thinking sports is one of your ways out of here. So people will invest a lot more time into your athletics than they will into the other things that you could possibly do. And you'll see certain backgrounds. There's a lot of people in professional sports leagues that have, I think it might have a disproportionate number of people coming from lower income areas than any other field where there's actual millionaires, actual people make that much amount of money, because they look at it as a potential way to get out of their place. Whereas somebody else might be like, maybe I'll study this, or maybe I'll go to that other place, and maybe I know an uncle who has this, who has started a business, maybe I can get a job at their place. So there's other selecting factors that kind of play into that I think should also be thought of in any sort of field, any sort of educational field, any sort of achievement. It's not simply, oh, let's just put this kid in Harvard, or let's put this kid in Keene State. I looked up Keene State to see. It was like, is this an actual place? They say Keene State, right?
Yeah.
How's it spelled? Keene?
Yeah, it's with two E's. I want to say.
I was thinking like maybe they were making fun of Keens and they're just making up a place.
Well, I was going to say, to sort of add on to this point as well. I remember I saw this article a while back talking about, oh, we need to extend opportunities, all that. Look at our top successful people like Zuckerberg and Gates. They went to Harvard, and it's like, okay, first off, there's two things with that. Number one, they dropped out. Number two, again, it's the selection effect, not the treatment effect. It's not they got into Harvard, learned some secrets, and then went on to become successful. No, you're already selecting for people that are very intelligent and hardworking, and they just simply thrived in an environment outside of academia. That's all it is. It's the same thing. Like LeBron James, if he wanted to do another sport, I'm sure he could. Like if he wanted to do, I'm trying to think like what's something comparable. Like maybe if he wanted.
He was all-state in football as a tight end.
Yeah, like he could have done something else, but he's in that range where he can still do really well. And it's the same thing with the academic stuff. Like people who excel in philosophy, yeah, they're going to do well at the classics because they're smart, they're conscientious, all that. So they're going to learn Greek and everything. And then in medical school, yeah, they're going to be good with the anatomy and then the precision, all that. So again, it's like you're selecting for those things, and those factors are just being applied in different areas. It's not. Again, I mean, they are being trained to a point, but it's also like you're already selecting for those things. Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, Keene State here, it's. I think it's in New Hampshire, so maybe they're saying similar area. It's a liberal arts college in Keene, New Hampshire. Yeah. It has 4,300 students as of 2017, 1,800 cost after aid. So is it the same as? It's actually cheaper. It's more expensive than Harvard after aid, because it says average cost after aid is 18,000, and our average cost of Harvard after aid is 15,561. So figure that out. Somehow, the acceptance rate of Keene State College is 81%, with a graduation rate of 64%. What's the graduation rate of Harvard? Graduation rate completed within the first 6 years is 97%. So you actually have you have a higher chance of graduating from Harvard than you do from Keene State, and Keene State is even more expensive. So does
But
that
I've heard that about Harvard though, that it's really hard to get into, but once you're in, you're likely to graduate. So like,
yeah.
again, I don't know if it's again, because if we talk about things like donations and affirmative action, all that, if like, oh, you're a shoe in because of these things, and then it's not that, it's like once you're in, it's not as hard. It's more they want to be selective in who they get. So I
Conan
don't know
O'Brien at the Harvard?
who did.
Conan O'Brien.
Oh, did he? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're putting Mark Zuckerberg as notable alumni. Is it? Are you alumni if you just go there?
I thought it meant you graduated, but
maybe they gave him an honorable, because I didn't think you can get alumni if you drop out.
No.
Okay, so
right.
yeah. So that's a Harvard. Let me see if there's any notable alumni from Keene State that might be complaining about this use. Notable alumni: Ernest Herbert, Molly Kelly, Robert A. Baines, David Lazo. I don't know any of these people. I mean, they have photographs. Tori Verdi. I guess this shouldn't really matter that much, but yeah. There's some notable alumni. I don't know any of these people though. But yeah, okay. So yeah, keep going. Sorry.
So next up, we're going to talk about what's called negligent advertising. So our authors came up with an analogy. So they say, okay, let's say that Pfizer releases a drug called Collagra. It promises you that if you take this drug a few times a year over 4 years, you're going to make more money. You're going to be a better thinker. You're going to go on to live a successful life, all that. Then, okay, so of course you can see what they're analogizing. Like, let's say, like they're basically saying, like, let's say Pfizer releases a drug that gives you the effects of what college claims. Now, Pfizer, in this case, they conduct no clinical trials. They haven't examined any natural experiments, and their findings are the result of selection effect. So let's say they were to give these drugs to people who were already smart, hardworking, all that. Mm-hmm. Would this be considered ethical by the FDA? No, it wouldn't. This would be a problem. And then this gets into the concept here, what they call negligent advertising. Now, negligent advertising, they're not technically lying, but they're not researching to see if the effects that they claim the thing will have actually has. So you'll say, oh, this product will do this, and that, but you didn't actually research it to prove if it would do that. So you can argue here in this case with this drug, Pfizer didn't technically, they didn't think they were lying, so they're not technically being dishonest. They even may believe their own claims, but it is possible the claims are true, but they're not proven. That's the thing. So let's say if a rival drug company like Eli Lilly and Company offered Universalitis for $1 a piece, and it only took 1 minute to administer, but it had the same effects of Collagra, well, who would be worse there? Well, of course, it would be Pfizer, because okay, with Universalitis, you waste, worst case, you waste $1 and a minute of your life. Whereas with Collagra, okay, you spend 4 years, all this money, and you may be no better off. So so of course, what's wrong here? Well, it's a failure of due diligence on the part of Pfizer. Now, you do have to remember there's buyer beware, seller beware. They talk about that in business a lot, where people have to be careful in who they buy from, what they buy, what the claims are, and all that. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that people should put out dishonest advertising either. And the users of Collagra would sacrifice a lot of time and money to use this. Of course, that's obviously unethical. And they made the point that, think about if any other business did this, like if cars said, oh yeah, this car, if a car company says this car goes from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds and it's this safe, but there's no actual crash test or anything, of course, we would obviously see the problems with this. And we may have issues with the FDA, obviously, as far as how expensive it is and all that. But for what it's worth, there is some sort of due process here. There are randomized controlled trials. They collect data. They demonstrate the statistics versus other companies, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we have our issues being more anarchist with the FDA as far as it being a monopoly and costly and all that. But at the same time, there is a due process. But universities themselves don't go under this due process. It's just they tell people, oh, you're going to go through all this, these things will happen, but there's no real evidence for how or why that's actually the case. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, with that first one, well, I guess we're as we mentioned in previous videos, this is talking about higher education, specifically in the United States of America, which deals with about the about 9,500 or so institutions of higher learning that give degrees, both postgrad and undergraduate. So Department of Education does not necessarily have that much influence over that. Yet maybe there is an FDA sort of equivalent in the public school K through 12 system, but regardless, that public school K through 12 system also indoctrinates in schools the students that enter this higher education system. So if these students are unprepared to actually deal with the higher education system and get the actual achievements, if they're not also being warned in that environment before to say, hey, actually do better at selecting what you're going to do after this, there's questions to be raised in that. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what kind of system. I wouldn't kind of like I should read something already with the ANCAP type thing where I'm like, I don't bring an FDA of an education communication and administration or something
well, and again, that's a thing. I know we have our criticisms of the FDA, and that could be a whole discussion, but overall, at least there is some sort of due process, whereas here they just make all these claims and people just take on faith what they're saying, and they're never really put to the test. Again, the FDA makes errors, the FDA is overpriced, all that, but like there have been instances of drugs recalled. They do put tests. So there's a little, it's a little bit better overall. Again, same thing with cars. Like there have been bad cars put onto the market, but there is some standard, whereas people it goes to that whole romanticized view of academia that somehow academics are just they're just telling the truth here, when it's like, no, I mean they're trying to sell you a product. They're going to do what they can to get away with this stuff, same as anyone else.
Yeah, and there might be something like this, like Rate My Professor, which is a website that started that might go into these kind of things where people can now go in and look for more information. And this is a thing that we're also saying out there for the parents. This is part of why we're having this conversation, because we're interested in that, because we have also learned a lot of things outside of universities, outside of schools, that a lot of the things I learned, I've used, but that's because I'm specifically in this field. I wouldn't say I've made millions doing. I definitely haven't made millions by doing that. There's possible ways I could have studied other things that could have been more lucrative in that way. But I'm relatively happy with what I've done, and I've learned a lot outside of that. There's information that I have now that might have changed some of the things that I did in the past, but this is what we're saying: is there's ways to do this. There might be apps out there. We've talked about places like Praxis. In the previous conversation in critical theory, we mentioned Thaddeus Russell, has his Renegade University type of program. We know people like Ron Paul, Tom Woods. There's a Ron Paul homeschooling curriculum that handles more K through 12. But this is part of why we're having this conversation, because I think there's now more ways to actually get a better idea of how you're actually going to be able to do this. Don't just fall back on that idea that, oh, just getting a college degree is the only important thing.
Yeah.
Because one of the things is they say, oh, we should have applications for jobs to be blind. Like remove race from it. Don't put people's names because they could be biases on there. What if people said, okay, don't put people's universities. Just say, okay, I have an economics degree. Someone just says, I have a degree in economics. They shouldn't put Harvard, or they shouldn't put Keene State. Just say economics. Yeah. Would people support that, or do people count on it being like, oh, it's Stanford, oh, it's Ohio State University, oh, it's this and this? They count on having the cachet of the name of the school versus just the actual information. I think that would be kind of interesting to see if there's any blinds done on that kind of application process where they just say, what are the things the person has learned versus where they learned it from.
Yeah, I think I sent you that chart that Praxis posted yesterday. I think that might be worth including in this too, where they talk about, should you go to college? Then they ask the various questions, and then they have objections like, do you want to go? Why? Do you want to get away from home? Well, okay. Do you have to go to college to get away from home? Oh, well, you want to participate in the college life. Well, do you have to go to college for that? Or can you just go to sporting events and become friends with college students and then go to parties and other things? And it's like, and that's something Zachary Slayback, who used to be the business director, he wrote about in a book he wrote too. Like, if you want the college lifestyle, like you want to hang out with college people, go to events and things, you could still do that. I mean, as I said in a previous discussion, and that author of Elephant in the Brain said, he used to sit in on Stanford classes. Like, you want some of that life, you can do that. But again, it's like, do you need the degree to do that specific thing? And then if so, is it worth paying it? And are there jobs available for you? And again, the chart does a better job of explaining it than I'm doing here, but I think those are questions everyone should be asking. I think they're at very least.
It could actually be cheaper than that. Yeah. Like, think about this, like we said, okay, before the $73,000 for Harvard. Definitely,
Yeah.
it would definitely be cheaper to move to Boston, find some, even
Yeah.
if you're just working at a McDonald's,
Yeah.
and then you find time to go and sit through certain courses of the things that you want to actually learn. And then with that money that you're making and not spending on actual tuition,
Yeah.
you can go to the bars and the clubs and the things like that and
Yeah.
associate with the Harvard students for those 4 years. Even during the summer, you'll have money to take a trip to Europe and go hang out
Yeah.
with American college kids, like
Yeah.
traveling all around Europe and things like
Yeah.
that, see places. And you could do that, do online courses and things like that, and then still have the information,
Yeah.
but you won't have the actual paper degree. But how much value is in the actual paper degree? So that's just part of what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next up, I'm going to go through a few of the problems with this. So as I sort of stated, universities don't test their products. Again, drug companies like Pfizer, they do the randomized control trials, data, they compare results to other drugs, et cetera. Again, we can talk about issues with the FDA, but there is some sort of process. Cars do a similar thing. There's crash tests. They test how quickly does the car accelerate. They test when does the airbag come out, all those things. And this is interesting here too. I didn't know this. We talk about how old the K through 12 system is with the Prussian system. I found out here that the basic model of higher education actually started in Europe in about it started in 1088 in Bologna. So
Wow.
that's almost 1,000 years. So that's one of those things I always make fun of. People say like, oh, the Constitution's outdated. It's a 200-something-year-old document. Well, this university system's 1,000 years old. It's like, why does that have to stay the way it is? Again, it's like I said in my example with my grandmother, it's like, how much has the world changed since she was born? Like, all this other stuff has changed, but the school system, aside from special ed and some computers, what differences are there? And why does it have to stay this way? Like, the only answers I can seem to get on that are the bureaucracy and the teachers benefit from the status quo, but the average person on the street certainly doesn't. And again, I think it may be rational ignorance. I think it may be inertia, but if more and more people talk about this, I think it could lead to some good changes happening. So the second problem, it's the evidence of selection effects. Again, college graduates are smarter, more conscientious, more successful financially, healthier, happier, more likely to maintain a satisfying marriage than a high school graduate. So they're also less likely to get divorced, go to jail, become unemployed, or get hurt on their jobs. But again, it's like, is that cause or effect? It's selecting for people who are more conscientious, smarter, harder working, so they're more likely to have better results. It's not college trained them to be better in those things. So again, even lower level schools like Keene, again, will admit students who have good grades, better credentials, all that. But again, is that okay? Students who go there for other reasons, like again, students who want to stay local. I've known some people like that. So in 2015, the Lumina Foundation published a report called "It's Not Just the Money," that talks about all the advantages college graduates have over non-college graduates. And but the thing is, the report fails because it fails to take account for selection bias, which is a basic requirement. So this was published by an advocacy group, not a peer-reviewed journal. So the issue with that, of course, is that when we're talking about selection effects, is that applies to the students choosing majors as well. Again, smarter students are going to pick more demanding things like physics, philosophy, all that. And then students who just want to get an easy grade in and out, they're going to pick the easier classes. So that becomes a little murkier too, because then you kind of know that, okay, if the smarter, more conscientious students were to take the less demanding classes, they would ace them easily. Whereas if the students who, let's just say, aren't as good, if they were to take the harder classes, they would struggle big time. So, but again, because they pick their majors, it sort of gets a little murky as far as how challenged are they really. So, for example, here it says that high school students who say they will major in philosophy tend to have a higher than average SAT score. And a lot of these students, by the way, have never even taken a single philosophy class. Like my high school didn't offer philosophy, for one. Philosophy is a hard major, and of course, some people, it'll weed out anyone who's not fit for it. So you could argue again that the treatment effect applies to a point, to a degree, because again, already smart students are going to become smarter after studying philosophy. Like my example with LeBron James, like he's going to be the apex of his ability, but again, he's already being selected based on his other traits. Same thing with the philosophy students. Like, you're taking students who are already very, very good quality students, and then they're just being pushed to their limits. So there have been a few studies on this, but they haven't been conclusive. So like, again, how much do smart students improve from philosophy? They said some of the studies show no effect, some have a minor positive effect, and some even have a negative effect. And Stacy Dale and Alan Kruger wrote a series of papers that estimate what value going to an elite college has when corrected for the fact that the students are already elite. They measured students who were accepted into Ivy League schools but decided to go to other ones for various reasons. They found that decades later, their income was about on par with students from the elite schools. So again, it's even students who didn't go to the top schools but went elsewhere. They like, if they went to a lesser known school but still did well in the job market, they ended up making more money anyway. So it wasn't, again, okay, they went to Harvard and learned some secret, or like in the case of Gates and Zuckerberg, oh, they dropped out. It was, no, these were already smart, hardworking people who just thrived in a different environment. So that's what the evidence says as far as we know. Again, if it's wrong or there's evidence the otherwise, I'm willing to see it, but I haven't seen anything yet. Any comments or thoughts on this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the selection thing is something that I hear being brought up a lot for people who want to defend certain things, and they get those things mixed up. I'll use two general examples. One of them was from my time spending a lot of time in the manosphere kind of examples, where you had the own way, anti-feminists, or even in the feminist circle, some of the people who are maybe against some of the, depending on what kind of feminists, because we had that one conversation about the feminists. Depending on, because there's trad feminism, so it's like, yeah. There's those kind of things. But when people say, oh, people who are married are happier and earn, it's like maybe those people are single. And if you say single people, you're also counting the divorced people, the people who are single parents and things like that. And then you compare that to the married people who are a group that self-selected, who might have spent a lot of time being single, who might have enough self-knowledge about themselves, enough comfort to maintain the things, to have certain features that enable or encourage a happy relationship, a happy, strong relationship. Each of them are within the sexual marketplace value that they find. The woman finds that the man is earning enough that they don't feel tempted to go outside. The woman has enough attention from the man, or feels she has enough ability to express herself and pursue these certain things. She had children at a certain time when she's actually raising the kids, and she's into those.
So bear with me here, excuse me. I had some connection issues while recording this, and I already had done some edits before, but there's some parts where it was too garbled, so I'm going to have these voiceovers where I actually come on and try to explain and make some sense out of what I was saying in that part that might have been slowed down. If you've been watching the video, you've probably noticed some parts before, but in this one, I'm talking about the selection effects, and I like comparing things to reproductive issues like sexual marketplace values as those define our society.
Things will already select for people who are happier. And then if you're in a family, you're going to want to earn more, because in general, families are there to raise children. Raising children is rather expensive, it's something you invest in. If you're the one person working, you're also supporting more people. So it's kind of unfair to say, we're going to compare what somebody who's supporting 3 or 4 people earns compared to somebody who's supporting just themselves. Like, they're going to have different things. You don't need a 5-bedroom home if you live by yourself. So you're not going to be choosing a job that's going to earn more. So that's going to be part of why you actually might not be earning as much. So when you have something like that, that's one of the things. Another selection I heard this in was being in the atheist and anti-theist kind of circles. And you'd hear people say, oh, look, but religious people are happier. Like, well, are they really? And also depends on where you are. Like, if I told you that in Saudi Arabia, people who are heterosexual, monarchists, and Islamists, and Muslim happen to be happier and earn more in the Saudi society than an anarchist, atheist, homosexual, like female. Yeah, because I think that the environment might select for it. Where if you are an anarchist, if you are homosexual, if you are if you are an atheist in that environment, it might not be that easy for you to navigate and earn in that culture, in that society. And so there might be certain things that would select for your achievements that are not necessarily tied in to the main type of thing that you're trying to focus on. So I think that's the way statistics can kind of be twisted, and correlation does not imply causation. That's an important thing to think of.
Well, it's funny you mentioned. it's funny you mentioned that about income
Okay.
because we had this friend. It was this guy. One of my good friends at the time knew, and we used to always laugh at how he'd go to the gym and spend hundreds of dollars on training sessions. And I would say, like, how does he have money for that? And my friend was like, easy. He's not married. He doesn't have kids. So it's like
Yeah.
he's like that's where all the money goes. He's like, you see a guy with a nice car. He often got it before he was married. All that. And then the other 2 points I was
Mhm.
going to add on is that as you're sort of getting at, happiness is subjective. Like it's like those questions where they ask like people about healthcare system. They say, "Do you like your healthcare system?" But then that gets into a question of, okay, if you're like my aunt and you worked at a hospital and you have basically healthcare for life because of that, yeah, it's nice for you. But then that gets into like a poorer person is not going to be able to afford it. But then of course people in politics get these like gold plans and whatever, which are really nice. So for them, they can say, yeah, we have the best healthcare in the world and we have access to it. But then so a lot of this stuff just gets very subjective when they just say like, do you like this? Is this good? It's kind of vague. And then to your other
Yeah.
point too, I know that certain countries in the Middle East, there actually are laws against atheism, for example. So again, depending on the environment, like how many of those people are going along with the laws and telling pollsters, "Oh yes, we're happy, we like this," but then in their own thoughts, what are they actually thinking? So again, some of that stuff gets a little vague, and you see that issue with the polling
Yeah.
done more recently.
Yeah. And but that is also another thing with the objective thing, where this is a very subjective field. So, this is a question to the people out there. If you want to think it out, just try to as part of this. What exactly are the schools about?
Yeah.
What would an objective way be to measure if something is positive or not? You could with food with the FDA, you can easily say, okay, this is poison.
Yeah.
But then even with the FDA, there's a whole debacle with the food pyramid that has just gone on for just entirely too long. I think they've kind of tried to memory hold that whole food pyramid thing. I don't really see it being advertised as much as it once used to be. But you saw the explosion of all these different diets and keto, the primal, the paleo diet, and then
Paleo.
like all those other things. It's like gluten free. All these other things have come out when it used to be just in the United States of America, and the rest of the world was following, trying to match it. It used to be just the food pyramid. That used to be the key thing. Everyone thought that's how to actually measure nutrition around the world, and it's not quite the same. You look at Japan, the amount of rice people eat in Japan versus the amount of equivalent carbs people eat. But then you look at certain people, some people can't take alcohol in a certain way, yet an entire group of people might be able to take alcohol in a certain way. So you just having rice in and of itself. So there's all these things to consider. And then that also needs to be put in when you're thinking about something where you're consuming information and education, and how do you consume that? How do you select what your diet should be, what your requirements are, what you might be allergic to, what might be a superfood or whatnot to certain people might be poison and death to some other
Yeah.
people. So yeah, those are things to consider.
Well, 2 points I was going to bring up too. Do you know why the food pyramid came into existence in the first place?
Not so
It, it,
much.
it's
I
it's
mean,
the
the
it's
porn
the
industry was it?
it's the usual political thing of we need to do something. This is something. Let's do this. So it's, oh
Oh,
look, if we're looking out for, yeah. So that's what one of my friends told me, and it was one of those things that just got pushed for years. I remember even as a kid in the '90s, you would see it hung up in classrooms. You should be eating
yeah.
this many grains, all this, yeah. And then of course time passes, they're like, wait a minute, maybe you shouldn't be eating this many carbs. Maybe certain fats aren't as bad as we thought, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it was that whole thing, and it just got held up as gospel, and people didn't question it for a while.
Yeah, because they did that, and that was again the K through 12 system. That's it, schooling the children to think that's how it is. When in my school, again, the school I went to is one of the top schools. So when I was going through this, I didn't understand how. Like we had a crew team, like the rowing team, we had the gymnastics squad, we had like all sorts of just
So bless Steven's heart, looking around the screen sometimes, they're going to need to figure out a way for us to notify each other when there's some kind of slowdown. But anyway, so what I was saying here was the school I went to was and still is one of the top public schools in the United States of America. So the experience that I had was rather different. So some of the classes and courses and ideas that I had might not have been that typical of your average American. And I was talking about home economics class. I remember particularly still being in school and them talking about cutting back home economics classes, but I had home economics classes when I was in that school. So there's a lot of things I had there that other people did not have. So that could inform some of how I went forward in life.
the school lunches are being based off of the food pyramid. So you're being trained that this is how you should eat. The 3 meals a day, even the whole 3 meals a day thing, it's not necessarily that needed.
No.
With intermittent fasting, there's lots of positives with that. There's things to kind of consider where now you get to the point where people just have this idea, they're just going in this autopilot, like they have to have the carbs, the meats, the veg, very little on the veg in every meal. They have this idea of what food is supposed to be. And we understand of just that. And that's when you're talking about food at schools, let's not even bring the vending machines that are accessible, advertising constant things to very impressionable youths about these bright colors and sugars and playing all these tricks with people's minds. But that much actually imprints onto children as they grow up into adulthood, and all the things that about hey, you're supposed to obey authority, the question authority, the guidelines, you're supposed to be here, you have to remain in this class for these group of people. We can't say, hey, can I go to that other class? Friend, like, why am I learning with these 12-year-olds when my information level is with the 15-year-olds? Like these kind of stratifications and organizations carry on through to high school, through to
I tried to get as much out of that as I could. It was a bit off. Okay, so I was talking about nature versus nurture here. Is it the nature of humans that they want this kind of thing? I said humans. Is it the nature of them that they want these things and then they create the schools that are like this? Or do you learn this in school and then there's a demand for it in university that's incalculated, that's driven even deeper into the people, and then once those people graduate from university, they get into general population, into the world, and then they demand that because they've been so used to that kind of environment of control and authority and this, you have to be here, you have to do that, you have these limitations. I don't know.
Those dynamics of that they had in colleges, in universities, and that's why when you have critical theory, when you have those kind of things coming out of there, those demands, we demand shelter, we demand a living wage, because at university, you'd go to the university, you'd have your living cared for, your food, your housing, your cafeteria, you have your job. Your job is to go to class. So that I demand, because I picked this major, now my job is to show up at this class and be fed and be taught and be coddled. And they think that's how the rest of the world should be. And it's a mess.
We'll get more into this. We'll get more into this in the next two sections as well with student evaluations and grading, but you'll see a lot more of these issues coming up as far as subjectivity and like personal preference and what are they really evaluating and all that. So these are tougher questions. These are tougher issues, but I think the authors are, and hopefully we are asking the right questions. All right. So moving on. So moving on, problem number 3 is the evidence of signaling. So again, it's the chicken or the egg thing. Did students make more money because they were good enough to get into Harvard, because they went to Harvard, or both? Based on Dale and Kruger studies, it was mostly the former. So why do college graduates make more money than others? There's two theories. There's number 1, the human capital theory. Colleges make students, they teach students more hard and soft skills, which make them more productive. Then there's number 2, signaling theory. Colleges show that a student has a higher education level, which can be bolstered by a tough major in a big name school. So colleges tend to push the first explanation, of course. Again, that goes to the point about philosophy and liberal arts. Study this, you'll become the leader of tomorrow and all that. And but then at the same time, they have little proof to back it up. Now, in Brian Kaplan's book, The Case Against Education, he tests the first theory using public data. He finds that students generally forget almost everything they learn in high school and college. The skills and learning are generally compartmentalized and non-transferable. Gains in skills are at best modest. Gains in earnings are likely explained by pre-existing abilities and so on. If you drop out of school a few weeks before graduation, you'll still have the same skills as a person who finished college. You just won't have the diploma. So, and that's something I've sort of wondered too, because that whole thing of like, if you drop out towards the end, you'll basically have learned everything but won't have the diploma. Now, I've seen people do that drop out towards the end. I don't really get it because you already spent all that money. But again, as a matter of principle, do you really know that much less, or you just don't have the piece of paper? So again, that ties into the signaling. Any comments or thoughts?
Yeah. Not so much. I think I'm also trying to think of why that would be. Maybe even to them, it's more something to them where they're so frustrated with the whole experience, they don't want to legitimize it by
Maybe.
putting any worth into actually having the degree. Like leaving before that is the last like F you, I don't even need you, so whatever. So it's kind of it could be that.
That might be it. I just see
Huh.
it as you already spent all that money. Why throw it away? Because again, it's like employers aren't going to look at you if you have half a degree. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, like my parents have my degrees. I don't even know where they actually are. I think from that time I actually got them, I haven't seen them again since then. And I'm just like, oh, okay, they're there. Yeah.
So problem number 4 is that there's evidence that most students don't learn soft skills. So this is a bit harder to measure, as again, students tend to gravitate towards things that they like and are good at. So you can't really measure if a student were to be thrown into another class and they were really challenged, how well would they do? There's no real measure for that because again, students pick what they want to study. So in 2013, Richard Arum and Josipa Rosca, I don't know if I'm saying the names right, published something called Academically Adrift, Limited Learning on College Campuses. This is the book that was cited earlier when they talked about how many hours students spend in class and study now compared to the past. So according to a study on the University of California, they found that students have about 3 hours of leisure for every hour of study. So they also did a study which had students take the collegiate learning assessment multiple times over the course of schooling. The test consists of 3 components: a performance task and 2 analytical writing tasks. One is to make an argument, the other is to refute an argument. How did they do? At least 45% of students did not show statistical improvement over the first 2 years of college, and at least 36% did not show any measurable improvement after 4 years of college. In general, Arum and Rosca determined about half of students gained no general reasoning or writing skills in college, about 40% gained modest skills, and only about 10% gained significant skills. Now, of course, we can discuss the merits of the study. For example, some have argued that if students knew this test counted towards a grade, they would have put more effort into it. Instead, it was just a test for a study, so maybe they didn't try as hard. But as far as we know, this seems to be one of the best long-term studies on the subject, and it didn't find proof that students learn much. Any thoughts or comments?
Here, I opened with talking about how people are confident that they understand what it means to be educated. Like, if you're not educated, then how are you confident that you know what it would be like to be educated or when you are educated? How do people actually trust that those credentials are actually valid? And I also apply this to universal suffrage. Someone says, I can't vote on my personal issues, but I'm qualified enough to vote on someone who would be able to vote or decide not just their personal issues, but everybody else's issues. There is something in there that seems kind of odd to me.
I really I don't understand how people get confident in some of these things. I think there's ways to be more confident, like these studies we're speaking about here, but how many parents have actually looked into these studies before they go through the college application process? How many kids, for sure, know any of this information before they actually pick a university and go into thousands of dollars of debt? I don't think there's enough actual knowledge to make a lot of these decisions.
And that's kind of the point the authors are making. Like, if there's evidence that we're wrong here, if we're wrong, the authors are wrong, somebody present it. But as far as we know, these are just assertions that are taken on faith. Come here, learn this, you'll do great. And there's no real studies to actually prove out is that the case. That's the issue. So problem number 5 is students don't seem to transfer soft skills. They call this the psychological assumption of liberal arts. Liberal arts classes are intended to teach critical thinking, which can be used to develop hard skills for a job. Now, if we go by studies like the one in the last section, we can conclude this assumption is false. So colleges tend to claim these students won't just learn these skills, but can and will use them in their day-to-day lives. But what if the assumption is false? Colleges, again, do not appear to study this and see if it actually works. They just assume it does. So Kaplan, again, explains in his book how educational psychologists have actually studied this for over a century and seem to have found that students only learn material they're specifically taught, if anything at all. The educational psychologists Richard Haskell, Douglas Detterman, Terry Hyland, and Steve Johnson have all said similar stuff. So one way this is tested is that students are assigned a problem with a particular solution, then another problem with a similar solution afterwards. They find that the majority fail to recognize the pattern and make the connection. They find that the rate of failure is higher if they include a time delay, if they distract the students with an unrelated problem, or if the problem is introduced by a different professor in a different context. So again, it's like students, they have that very rigid thinking, kind of like that guy from Harvard who I talked about last time, where it's like they're very good at conforming to what they're told, but then they have to go outside of that and they don't seem to be good at it. So another strategy is to ask students to apply their classroom skills outside the classroom. It's been found that in general they don't. Barry Leschowitz took hundreds of Arizona State University science students and tested whether they would apply the science skills they learned in the classroom to problems they read about in the paper. So, for example, he asked them if students that needed psychological counseling had poor dietary habits. Does this mean that they should eat better in order to resolve their psychological issues? Well, the correct answer would be no, not necessarily, because a psychological problem could be the root of bad diet, or it could be that poor eating habits and mental issues have a common cause. So correlation, again, doesn't prove causation. Again, that's basic stuff. And in this study, he found that students had a less than 1% rate of a good scientific response. And again, you can say maybe that's not their field or whatever, but these are students who had gone through years of college, and many had studied advanced math, including calculus. So they couldn't solve some basic social science questions. And again, in short, these sorts of studies find that students only seem to apply what they learn in their relevant fields and not really outside of it. So any thoughts or comments?
When it comes to this, if we're talking about diverse ways of knowing, I don't think there's really diverse ways of knowing in general, but there's definitely multiple ways to teach different topics. Some people might want something more practical and example-wise. Some people might be able to just do something theoretically. It might be some kid grew up on a farm, so if he has some kind of mathematical problem put in some kind of example involving farm animals, it will just click for them, whereas somebody else might have been traveling all around the world, living in cities. So if you do some kind of thing about like airport transitions and things like that, for that same formula might click for that kid. So that I do understand and accept. But when you get into the whole issue of like, now we need diverse teachers. Oh, women in general, you say girls learn better from women. Discount the fact that from K through 12, it's like 95% female teachers or something like that. Yeah. But when you say now we need higher education, we need to have half and half male female. Are you saying, despite that massive bias towards female teachers in K through 12, boys are still able to come out of that and still achieve a lot more from that K through 12 handicap that they've been getting? And let's say there actually is some sort of handicap and you're saying you want K through 12. Is that necessarily bringing up women, or is that handicapping the men who are in the university, or the boys or the males? Or are you going to go to the point to advocate for full-on segregation, where we just say they should be male schools with male teachers and female schools with female teachers? And then why don't you break it down further? It should be black female schools with black female teachers, white male schools with white male teachers only. Like, they have certain insights. Oh, if this is an Alabama school, it's only people from Alabama. You should be able to teach these people. Then you get to the point where, why aren't these people just advocating for homeschooling? Because who would actually be able to identify more with every single child than one of their parents? Who should be able to understand their peccadillos and how they learn, how they teach, how they act, and have that connection, when who would be even more invested? But no, they find ways to kind of stop that whole, we need to specialize learning to each student at a certain level that doesn't seem to go all the way to, we need to get back to a point where learning can be as individualized as possible. And as individualized as possible is harder to get more individualized than a homeschooling type of environment or an apprenticeship type of environment, one-on-one kind of thing, where you're learning directly from that person. And not everything can be done in that way, but I think there's a lot more ways that can be done versus advertising and saying that coming to this factory schooling environment is truly the best way to do it. As you mentioned, with many of the kids who didn't go to the Ivy Leagues, even though accepted, they might have had several reasons of why it was preferable maybe to go to a school that's closer to their home so they can commute, or their parents can come visit. They have some extra connection with that, and they can still learn the information. So I think that's one thing that is being seen right now with a lot of this remote learning. There's going to be ways where you can get the information itself without so much of the location, which I think most of the advertising is about the location rather than the information.
Well, we'll get more into this on the section on grading as well. But again, where this also becomes murkier is the good versus the bad teachers. Like, I think they say something like you could have students who aren't that great, but you can have teachers who are really engaging, who really motivate students. So then that'll sort of offset the students who aren't as good. But then if really strong students have weak teachers, they can sort of bridge that gap because they'll learn things on their own. They'll learn things faster. They'll take more initiative and all that. So again, some of this sort of gets murky because it's hard to weigh it either way. And the other thing to sort of add on to what you were saying, I sort of saw this in some restaurants as well, where certain cooks, they said they actually preferred working in smaller kitchens because they felt like one guy, I remember he said, I liked the small restaurants where it was me and like one or two other people, because it's like you have to learn how to do everything. Whereas in the bigger kitchens, things get very compartmentalized. Like you just do this station, then it's months or even years before you move up. Now, obviously, you can walk around, look at the other stations. There's some learning by osmosis, but it feels more compartmentalized versus you're thrown in that where it's like, okay, you have to do entrees, you have to do vegetables, you have to do desserts, all that. So it's like you really have to learn everything. And some people have said they found that more valuable. Again, that's more of an anecdotal thing, but I wonder, to add on to your point about academia, I think it sort of applies as well. You have that one person mentoring you directly rather than you're 1 out of 50 or 100 in a class. The professor has no idea who you are.
Yeah. That is the way teachers. Yeah. I was thinking about with bad teachers. I saw this one meme. If I remember, I'll put it up on the screen or something. Or leave it in the links. It was it's like my parent walks in and says, "Why are you watching my 600-pound life? I thought you were supposed to be on an online class in a meeting." And then the next line is, "My online PE teacher," and it's just the face of
I saw that. Yeah,
person.
That's funny. Yeah.
Where you have some situations where there's a question I've asked people, like, can you have a really obese personal trainer? And yeah, the personal trainer can still understand everything about fitness and teach you accurate things about what to do to be fit. Like you could have an alcoholic who teaches an Alcoholics Anonymous course. Yeah. You could have therapists who are just a mess at home, but they're great marriage therapists because they can understand everything that would help a marriage in general, but still not be able to do any of those things in particular. And that's why I'm thinking with teaching and learning, it's the information, stupid. It's not, oh, this person is white. Like, I don't care. Somebody can be white and come to Kenya and study the history of the Luya tribe and the language. Like, I don't know the language. I can understand some of the things when my parents speak it, but they can come, study, go to the countryside, talk to the Wazes and the Washoshos, that's the older people, the ancestors, and learn about the religions, the histories, how people believed and how the Luya tribe came to be. And they can teach me about that stuff, even though they're not genetically any bit of that, because they're able to acquire the information. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. This is such a key part of just the human condition, our ability to just transfer information without having to have that as part of your lived experience, without having to be part of your genes. You can just take this piece and gift it to somebody else, pass it on for continue through history. We can learn from people from thousands of years ago that we never actually met. These are the magnificent things. So we need to find better ways to keep that amazing thing.
Sure. So just a few points to sort of wrap up here. So people who write these ads are most likely sincere. Authors actually compare college marketers to psychics, televangelists, or cult leaders. Like they believe what they're doing. It's just how credible is it? Academia is it? But look, I mean, academia is expensive both in terms of time and money. So I think it's reasonable to ask for evidence for this stuff. And again, it's not that they're lying, but it is negligent advertising. Like some of them may actually think people come out of this school and are that much better, but what's the evidence? It's just assertions, and it's just assumed, oh, academics are this special class that somehow are above this. And then what should we do about this? It's tough. Again, the whole system itself, a lot of people are invested in the status quo. There's no legal apparatus like the FDA to deal with this. So a few ideas that the authors came up with is regulate academia the way we regulate drugs and other things. There could be some sort of organization that supervises it. Again, they're trying to take a non-ideological stance, but these are just some potential ideas. So another idea is class action lawsuits for colleges if they don't deliver what's promised. Other people have suggested that. I think it's an interesting idea, but it'd be hard to implement. And then the last one, which I think you and I would probably agree most with, is allow competition in terms of alternative forms of education. That forms of education that produce people that have better skills, are more suited to start working, get a better foot in the door, all that, those will attract more people like Praxis and other things. And then over time, other people will adapt to that, offer alternatives, or who knows, maybe come up with something better even. So I think that's at worth at least considering, because look, we're ultimately spending $500 billion a year on something that doesn't do what was promised. And that bears asking these questions at very least. So.
Yeah. One of the ones I was thinking about was a simple thing like if you have a university, let's say you're saying, okay, if you come and you study philosophy here, we've seen on average that people who graduate from our course in philosophy, for the first 10 years after they graduate, they earn $50,000 a year. So they say, okay, the price for that would be $10,000 a year. You have to pay $5,000 upfront, and then they're allowed to take 10% of your first, however much you earn totally over those next 10 years to recoup up to that 5,000. Or if it's, or they just say, 10% of what you earn after you leave here is ours. So it can go up to it can even go higher than the 5,000 to recoup. Because of course, if you're making more, you already paid for that. You can say, okay, that's what I actually paid for.
Yeah.
But if somehow you don't prepare the student enough to actually earn that much, you take the loss. So if it turns out the kid is not able to actually get employed after they graduate, then you don't get any of that money. There should be some kind of thing where they're actually on the hook. Because once they're paid, that's one of the things, like imagine, I guess some restaurants do this where you pay ahead of time. Let's say there's like or there's prefix, like what's it called? Prefix? Like price.
Yeah.
The
Pre-fee or price fix,
like a different price. So there's something like that where that's a different situation. But normally, and I think most people would consider education to be more of a service industry. Most service industry things, you pay at least part of it after. I guess with the hotel, you kind of go and you pay. And that's what I'm saying. With education, some of it is more kind of like hotel type of thing where you're paying for the location versus the actual information. I guess when you go to a movie, you pay before. So that's what I'm trying to think. Like, there's different ways to think about this. So I'm thinking like with a restaurant, you go, you order the food, they bring you the food, and then you pay them after you've consumed the food.
Yeah.
So which industries are people comfortable with paying beforehand? Which industries are people comfortable paying after? And I think with some of these things, there should be some kind of thing where there's an ongoing relationship, I think, where there should be ways to plan that whole situation where the university is more responsible of actually educating you and preparing you for what they advertise they would actually do, what they promised ahead of the time, because it's often not the case.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit for a second about where I went and some of the misleading advertise that they do with Culinary Institute of America, where I think I'd mentioned in a previous video how they've lowered the standards a lot, how it used to be you needed 2 years of restaurant experience. Now it's none. And what's really messed up about that is people go there thinking, oh, I'm going to become a great chef, but they have no idea what the industry's like. I've worked in kitchens. It's brutal. I mean, you work 12, 14-hour days, physically demanding, chefs yelling at you, poor ventilation, all this. People don't realize that's what they're getting into. And they go to school kind of ignorant, and then they graduate. And then if they quit cooking, it's like I did, for example, I went to front of house. It's, oh, well, it's not our problem. We didn't promise you all these things. So I think there's that dynamic of it as well. And then some of the advertising they did, I wouldn't say it was outright dishonest, but it was a little misleading. Like, well, Silas, I don't know if you're familiar with the Certified Master Chef exam.
No.
So it's a very tough test. The CIA offers it. I think there's fewer than 100 of them in the world, but it's a very demanding test. Like, you have to make a meal, but it has to be below so many calories. Of course, all the knife cuts and everything have to be very precise. And you have to pay a few $1,000s to take it. And I think you can only take it like 2 or 3 times. And then if you fail, they won't let you take it again. But the thing is, if you get that certification, you're set. Like, there was one certified master chef who I heard he was running a country club in Pennsylvania. He makes like $250,000 a year or something. And it's one of those things that once you get, like, people will seek you out for jobs and things, but of course, obviously very hard to get. Well, anyway, what the CIA does is they tell you that they have the highest concentration of certified master chefs in one area, but what they don't tell you is none of them actually teach. So you could say they're not technically lying, but I think people hear that and think, oh, I'm going to be taught by the best chefs. But a lot of them are either deans or they do research and development. That guy I just mentioned, he was teaching, but then he ended up leaving and getting that better job elsewhere. So again, you could say they're not technically lying, but I think they're trying to mislead people into thinking, oh, these are the people who are going to be teaching me, when it's not the case.
Yeah.
And I hear other universities do. Other universities do similar things with like Nobel Prizes and things like, oh, we have these Nobel Prize winners, but then they go on to become deans or do other things. So it's like you're not learning from them directly. So again, you're not lying, but they're not lying technically, but it is sort of misleading. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like we just talked about with Harvard there.
Yeah.
Let me see what is an alumni. Putting Zuckerberg as an alumni, they might have given him an honorary degree, and that might be part of why the honorary degrees come, because they can say, oh, this person got a degree from here, but they've actually never even attended a class.
Yeah.
What is the impetus? Like, that information is there. Like, technically, you could have found out if they actually teach before you signed up, right? But you just assume for some reason that they do. So, and this is the thing. And I'm not saying this is just on the institutions. These are places that interact with people. This is for everyone. It's for potential students, like parents, people with institutions, people looking to offer different options of learning, to understand, oh, maybe we can enter this niche and offer this. Like, things, people might open up apps and things like this. But why are some of these questions not asked beforehand? Because it's different hiding the information versus being outright duplicitous versus just like, oh, we don't have to share that information because we know it might be negative. It's a thing people do. So an alumnus, or masculine plural for alumni, or alumna, feminine plural or alumnae. I wonder if there's going to be an alumx, because for the people from the queer theory. No, I went to the school, I learned queer theory, and I'm an alumx. Not alumna or anything. So is a former student or pupil of a school, college, or university commonly, but not always. The word refers to a graduate of the educational institution in question. Okay, so commonly, but not always, a graduate. So he is an alumni. If you just go for a day, if you signed up, if you're on the rolls, you technically are an alumni of that university. So yeah, okay. I guess that's how they can also accept that, yeah, we've taken your money. So even if you drop out, you can summon of Harvard. Okay, so that's a thing. That's a thingy thing, I guess. But yeah, so why are the questions not asked? Why are things being done this way? What? The advertising thing, I think this is a key thing. It's a question for the people out there. And I'm trying to think of why exactly. Like, the university I decided to go to was, I wasn't really that into the whole university process. I remember in high school, once I realized I could get some kind of college scholarship to play football. I was pretty good at football in high school, and I was like, okay, I'm not studying anymore. And I literally just stopped studying. Apologies to any of my teachers. I can't really recall studying that much after I figured that out sometime in junior year of high school. I just stopped. I remember I took the SATs because I didn't want, like, again, apologies to my wrestling coach and the wrestling team. I didn't want to wrestle the second day of the wrestling tournament. And I heard they had SATs at my high school, so I signed up for SATs and just went for the next day. And then the university I picked was going to a different university in the conference. I had actually decided, yeah, it looks good enough for the school visit. And they were like, I was like, oh, I have another one scheduled for this other university, where one of my high school football coaches had gone to university and played football with the person who was the head football coach at this other university.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, so I was already going to go to this one. I had decided in my mind that, yeah, this seems like a place I could go, but I have this other one scheduled. And I guess they were so confident that I would go there that they were like, yeah, go ahead and go see that place. I went and saw that other place. I was like, I like this place better. I went to that place. So my college career, I'm trying to think of the reasons why I was picking these places. It wasn't so much of the advertising. I did some other college visits to bigger universities and things like that were interested. But what is the process that people normally decide? These are the questions. You've told us a bit about what helped you decide to go to the school you went to, but this is for the people listening out there. Is there actual advertising that actually made you choose your university or your major that you can specifically think of and remember? Then again, two other things in my post-grad after, and up going to Italy, because I was technically almost going to drop out of the university I was at. Then I went to Italy, and my folks were there at that time, and I ended up finishing it up at the university there that my sister was already attending. It was 10. No, she was going to attend again. But it was one of the few American universities in the area, so I ended up going there, finished up my degree, transferred back. That was very limited because there were a few there. And then the post-grad thing, I was interested in animation already. And one of the friends I had met while I was in Rome was attending that university. So for me, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I went and I heard this. So people talk about advertising through sports teams going out and being successful, getting the names out there. People talk about, we've talked about $3.5 million. Maybe you're one of the people who was actually reached out by that school that was spending $3.5 million in advertising. But this is a question to the people listening to this. What were the primary things that helped or played a part in you deciding to go to whatever higher education institution that you went to, or to decide to not go to any and pursue other forms of learning or trade schools or other things that helped you? Yeah, so there's this kind of things that general question to the people out there.
Sure. Yeah, because my criticism with the CIA, like I say, with lowering the requirements, it's they're sort of lulling in people who don't know what the industry is like, and then when they get out into the industry and find out it's not, it's, oh well, we didn't promise you anything, so it's on you. That's sort of the issue that I have. And again, it used to be that because they required the 2 years of restaurant experience, you had to spend at least 2 years in a kitchen, so you knew what you were getting into. And then if it wasn't for you, okay, you don't go to school or you do something else. But the concern is if they're just telling all these people, oh yeah, you're going to be a great chef, you're going to be like the people on TV, it's easier to sort of lull in those ignorant people. And again, part of that, like you say, it's not just the institutions, it's also parents and the people themselves. But I do think they are taking advantage of the situation as it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a part where I don't think it's unethical, because it's kind of just, it's what advertising is. It's like we said, unless they outright lie to deceive, with the intention to deceive, but leaving certain things out, being selective of what information you tell someone. Like even just my whole screed about the schools, I was telling you about certain parts, but I guess I did. I was like, there's other things I could tell you about the decisions, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, so that's the thing. I just ask for more information. There's information available. So if you're actually going to pick a place where you're supposed to learn information from, it behooves you and the people you're concerned with to get as much information about that place beforehand. Because I think a lot of us, I did some more research, of course, into these areas and the programs and the things that were in there, not so much in the after of it. There was some certain observations, like with the graphic design. I thought, oh, there's going to be something at that point. As you mentioned with the arts institutes, I think they do that as well, where they make certain promises or say, oh, this is an up-and-coming field. But then you learn web design and get with that. And then now there's sites like Squarespace that just, you go in and anybody can just put in information and it creates a really hot, quick website for you, things like Wix. Yeah. So those entire fields are things that not even in a generation, this came into existence and then just dissolved away. It was like by the time when you signed up for university, that might have been a burgeoning field. By the time you graduate, there's already an application that has made your field obsolete. So that has happened in certain fields, in certain places. Like now we've talked about the major crash with one of the conversations we had in the You Are What You Consume series. We talked about, the last one we had was about the restaurant industry. Do you think that's going to change a lot in the United States of America post-pandemic? A lot of restaurants have struggled with reopening, with getting these places. It might have increased the amount of people now cooking at home. At least from my experience, Americans have a vast amount of people who just can't cook. So there's a lot of demand for restaurants, somewhat, but still restaurants come and go. So what fields are going to change after the pandemic? What new ways of learning are going to exist? What new kind of demands are going to actually exist in these kind of fields? What do you think specifically with something like the Culinary Institute of America post-pandemic? What's your kind of ideas of, do you think it will do better? Do you think there'll be more demand for the services that institutions like they and other people offer?
Well, I'm wondering if you're just going to see a lot of, we'll probably talk about this in the next few sections, but things like credential inflation, where it used to be that having a culinary degree, you stood out, because the CIA was the first cooking school in the U.S. It was founded in 1946, the year after World War II. And Thomas Keller, if you watch an interview with him, he even says, he's like, when I started cooking, there was the CIA and like there was an apprenticeship program, and like that was pretty much it. Now you have ICE, the Institute for Culinary Education, you have the French Culinary, of course, CIA is still around, you have all these other schools, but they're also wondering if the degree has sort of been inflated because, again, the lower standards, and trust me, chefs in the industry are noticing, like, there are certain places that they used to prefer CIA they call it externship. It's an internship. They preferred CIA externs out of everyone else. Now some places won't even take them anymore because they know the standards have been watered down. So they're like, should we take these people? And then they talked about, okay, should they extend the program and spend more time in school? But again, you're going to see the same problem that you see with traditional education, where it's just people are going to be in more debt, need even more credentials to get started. And at some point, it's not going to be worth it, because if things continue on the current path, it's going to be what? You need a PhD to start working. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm wondering if it's sort of hitting that point where the degree is less and less valuable because more people have it. The standards have been watered down, and people are just going to say, forget it, I'll just work in the industry. And then they're either going to have to standards or they're just going to become obsolete. I don't know. It could go a few different ways, but it's hard to say.
Thinking we need to go towards more of an environment where it's like, there's that one saying where it's like, those who can't teach. And I went through my teaching experience, I was able to do some of those things. And maybe there is an aspect of it where people, I think it normally comes from the whole idea that, if you were able to actually do something else besides teaching, you would be doing that thing, or you would be making a lot more money or a lot more successful in the thing. So it's kind of a pejorative kind of thing about teachers in that sense. But I don't necessarily agree with it. And I also wouldn't think that teaching is normally like the last ditch thing. There's normally a lot lower things people would rather do than teach. Like it's rather desirable for certain people in certain places, especially when you talk about K through 12 with the summers off. And it's a thing like that. But I was thinking, instead of that, think of something more positive, and those who can teach, where it's like those who can, teach. So encourage that kind of environment where you get back to that kind of apprenticeship thing, or learning from people who are actually able to make a living and be successful in the certain field that they're teaching. And then you find kind of environments where they can teach the people. You can learn from those people. And maybe it's just somebody taking a few hours of a day, and maybe they pick one day of the week and then they go to the local university or give some online courses to certain people who are interested in their information. And there's things like that coming up, things like Masterclass, Khan Academy, all these other places. There's other ways of learning are out there. And maybe they're not as advertised as well as some of these original things. And maybe some of these original things have that same thing we're talking about with Harvard, where universities don't have to advertise that much because they're just people, they expect we're going to have this many kids coming in, because there's this idea in society that you have to go to a 4-year and get a degree in order to actually get this. So they rest on the laurels and feel we don't have to have a product that's good. That's as good as competitive.
Well, I was going to add one thing with culinary school. It's always the thing that people who are more critical of school would always point out. They're like, you come out of school, you're basically making minimum wage. And it's like, you're making like about what people would make just working in the industry, only you have even more debt. So then there were chefs who said, like, school debatable. They said the bachelor's definitely is not worth it, because the CIA offers a bachelor's program as well. But they said, people have said, like, it's not really worth it unless you want to get into hotel management or something. And I do know that companies like Marriott, they'll do management trainee programs where it's like, you go back, we'll help you pay for it, all that. Like, maybe something like that, it's worth it. But just to have it, because there's really no point. And I remember I had a conversation with a guy I knew from high school and I used to work with. He's like, oh, I'd love to get my master's in cooking. That'd be awesome. And I'm laughing. I'm like, you'd still be making minimum wage coming out probably. It's like, they're not going to put you in charge of a kitchen just because you have more credentials next to your name. Because again, it's a practical hands-on thing. They want to see what you can do. If you could get behind a line and do everything, sure, they might give you a higher position. But it's like, you have very little or no work experience, they're not going to trust that you're able to do it at that level. It's not like other fields where, okay, like my dad has a master's in chemistry, but okay, they expect you to have a certain level of knowledge, just putting in it. It's what can you do practically? And like I talked about in previous discussions, you can coast your way through school, but that doesn't mean that you can go into a nice restaurant and you're going to shine. And then employers are noticing that, as I'm saying. So.
There's also the extra aspect of this whole those who can teach is think of something that you can do right now, and how would you actually teach somebody?
Yeah.
What would you advertise? Let's say you had to teach somebody. All of a sudden you had to make your living by teaching people some productive skill that you currently have. What would you advertise as to sell your teaching ability? What teaching plan would you do? What kind of form of methods of teaching would you actually engage in? I think that's a good question to kind of ask yourselves. And I think with a lot of these institutions and businesses outsourcing this teaching system to other places, they're also losing touch with actually getting good enough students. They have to now reteach some of these things that are kind of impractical, that are not under their control. When you have that system where someone's like, okay, I'm paying for you to go learn this specific thing that we found out is important, that is different than just hoping that somebody is graduated with the things that are important. And I think in that process of trying to think about how you would teach something to someone who doesn't know what you think you know, it helps you know that thing in a different way, break it down, and you might learn more things about this. And I think if businesses were more concerned with understanding how to teach what they do versus just going on momentum, they'll value their product better, they'll be able to sell their product better, and I think it'll definitely be a lot cheaper to actually get people in. And there's also that added aspect. Think about just in general how people still have that feeling towards a university. Whether we agree with it being due, it's not normally due to the education, but it's due to maybe they met their loved one there, the person they married, or they had these other great experiences outside of the classroom. But they have some of that dedication, that closeness with that institution because they feel they've learned something and it's benefited them. If a workplace was the place you actually learned that information, there might be an added aspect. The person you're working with, the person who taught you the thing from the break came out when you didn't know anything. So you have some more dedication, the same way you have people having those strong connections to their university, wearing their university clothes until the day they die and things like that. You could have people have that kind of dedication to business and feel it's more of a home, it's more of an environment where they feel that connection with, and they understand, oh, I can stay here for other reasons rather than just being here because it's paying my bills. Like they have that closer connection to it. I think there could be something in there that the future will I think see more of that, and that's actually the way things were more in the past. It's it's another thing to I think we haven't said that in this conversation, but we said it in the previous ones. Is this factory schooling thing is the experiment.
Yeah.
These other ways of schooling that we've kind of talked about were the way things used to be and still are for most of the world, because despite the 9,000 schools we're talking about in the United States of America, 99% of the world, 99% of the world probably doesn't have a 4-year degree. And they still manage to not be starving and idiots. And there's ways to know things without the 4-year degree system.
Well, also too, and the Praxis guys talk a lot about this as well, is if you don't have the credential, not only do you not have as much debt, but you can afford a lower salary, so you can get your foot in the door like Derek McGill did. You can work for free, and then you can gain the skills, and then down the road, you can ultimately surpass some of those other people because you'll have more experience, you'll have the foot in the door. So instead of spending years studying stuff that you never use, you're actually gaining real practical skills. You're building those, and then you can say, hey, I made you this much money in marketing, I'd like more work, or would you recommend me to someone who does? And then you can keep building that up, and you're developing real skills. And in the long run, you could end up making more money, like in his case, rather than just, okay, you have to have a salary that's so high, and then employers wonder, is it worth paying this person this much because the credential has been inflated? So
yeah. And that's what we're talking about here. Is this is not simply just the university? There's a system that goes. It's a systemic issue. We talked about this in the critical theory talk, how they talk about, but this is actually a systemic issue that involves different. There's older people who've gone through this credentialized system where they understand that, oh, we need to continue this myth of education so our younger competition doesn't enter the market, so we're still valued. So let them go through and get into debt so they have to take these certain jobs. Because if they just all of a sudden realize this is not that important, they flood the market, they may completely throw off these things. Like I talked about how people are saying, okay, we'll outsource this training to you, and then we'll be able to focus on demanding this kind of credentialized to say we can only pay this. So this it's not straightforward. It's not something that can just shut down, even though despite the card shutdowns have occurred. But we understand it's a machine. It's big education.
Yeah.
It's this monolith, this behemoth that's been going on that we think should be talked about and discussed. Sure. But yeah, I don't know. Anything left on this chapter?
That's all I have. That was the last of the chapter. So.
Okay. So that was it. That was a chapter for why most academic advertising is immoral bullshit. And we shall be recording the next part, I think, tomorrow. We've been going, this is the second day in a row we've recorded, so we'll record the next part tomorrow. And I talked with Stephen. It's probably a faster publishing schedule for this series. And the next one is going to be on getting on trails and student evaluations.
Yep.
So that's going to be the next part.
Sure.
Look forward to listening to that. Again, if you haven't listened to the one on the 7 big economic insights, normative business ethics questions, descriptive business ethics questions, I think if you haven't listened to that yet, as I said at the start of this, I suggest that should be one that you listen before the other ones. At least if you haven't listened to that, try to listen to that talk before you listen to the rest of the ones. I think it would help. And you can also inform why we're approaching the information in the way we are. Okay, yes. So that's it for me.
Yep.
For you too. All right. Goodbye, everyone.